Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media present here at airport. Good evening, members of the national community, followers at home. I've taken the opportunity, having just returned from a very protracted period of travel and meetings of great import, to update the national community on what is before us and what we have been dealing with. So let me begin by saying I've taken part in the recent climate change COP26 meeting. As you know, Trinidad and Tobago has been very involved in this international effort to respond to climate change, the effort being driven by the work in the Ministry of Planning and Development led by Mrs. Camille Robinson-Regis and her technical team. This has been a very unusual kind of meeting in that it's really lasting for 2 weeks. It had an opening session last Monday, and following the formal opening where certain generic statements were made, countries were required to present their country positions on the response of each country to what is generally accepted as a situation that warrants the attention and action of every single country in the world, in that the Earth's atmosphere is warming at an alarming rate, and the consequences are already being observed as being quite devastating. And the scientists are warning that if we do not take steps to slow down this increase and turn it around, that once the rate of warming gets beyond 2 degrees centigrade, that it may not be reversible, and the damage can be quite far-reaching in virtually every climatic environment in the world. So this meeting was organized, and I represented Trinidad and Tobago and was required on Tuesday to present the country's position, and I did that, and I trust that those of you in the media at least would have assisted the public in understanding what Trinidad and Tobago was saying to the world. That being so, because of the nature of the problem, which now has a conversation that says it is caused by the use of hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal, particularly coal, and close behind oil, and somewhere not too far behind gas. We in Trinidad and Tobago have to pay particular attention that the so-called or anticipated corrective measures are measures where we have our voice heard and we have our interests protected. And that is why the Ministry of Planning and Development and our technical team have remained engaged in this matter throughout. So now that this COP26 meeting came up, we were very fully represented, and Mr. Robinson Regis and the team would be there, because after the first day opening, the second day and a half of country statements, the technical teams have gone on and will be at work until the 12th of this month, and then we'll have a clearer view as to what the action in the international positions are likely to be. As you know, there have been suggestions as to, well, some persons' views are that we should take decisions to stop using certain hydrocarbon products. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who organized this meeting, would have had as his goal decision-making on the following 4 areas of concern in response to this particular problem. One is to stop deforestation around the world, meaning because trees store carbon dioxide, using it in photosynthesis and creating their own body, and that is one way of trapping and keeping carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, that the devastation of forested areas had been a major contributor to the change in the atmosphere, which is leading to the deleterious outcomes you've been experiencing, the storms, the droughts, the floods, all of that. So one of the areas that had to be focused upon was, what do we do about, 1, not devastating areas that are forested, and 2, replanting forests so as to create, heading towards a carbon sequestration arrangement where you extract carbon from the atmosphere and tie it up in forests. But that has to be one of the responses. The other one is to phase out as early as possible, if not immediately, the use of coal as a fuel for generating electric power. Now, coal has been for centuries the major fuel in many countries. In fact, most of the developed countries today either have been using coal or still are using coal, and coal is still a major item of trade. But so, because coal, when it's burned, generates so much carbon dioxide, it's a major culprit. But then one comes to the situation as to how does the absence of the use of coal affect the economies of the world, which are still reliant and will be reliant on coal for quite some time. And you would have heard the positions of India, which indicates that they will not be able to comply as expected until 2050. You would know that Australia is a major exporter of coal. You would know that China, which drives a lot of the world's economy, is a major consumer of coal and therefore a generator of huge tonnage, millions of tons of carbon dioxide. So while the advocates have been demanding that something be done now, that something has far-reaching consequences for the economies and the populations who are in fact using the hydrocarbon products like coal. The third objective was the phasing out of the use of petrol and diesel in internal combustion engines. And of course, that comes closer home to Trinidad and Tobago. We have not been clearing much forest on a global scale. We don't have any coal to use or to sell, but we certainly are in the business of selling a product that's involved in oil and gas, in diesel and gasoline, and we are also an international seller of LNG, a hydrocarbon product, and we are, in fact, deeply involved in petrochemicals. So we have to keep our eyes wide open on what is being said about what is to happen with the world's economy, especially since the demand now going into the COP and is now coming out of it, that people are saying that these changes, these transformations are required to be done earlier rather than later. And of course, you would have heard the critical comments of some persons that leaders are not taking the decisions and we're just talking around the subject. But that is easy to say coming from people who have no responsibility other than to make the 7 o'clock news. But the world's leadership in virtually half of the countries in the world, the change from the fuel that we have known to alternative fuels would have far-reaching consequences. And then we come to the fourth category: who is going to pay for this damage that is being made by those who are using, and who is going to pay to whom? And the complaint that so far, in responding to this international problem, whatever monies have been put to solving the problem have largely been going to the people who have been causing the problem. And of course, those of us like Trinidad and Tobago and or Caribbean nations or Pacific Island nations and so on, who have already been receiving the fallout of the global warming, whether it is in stronger and more frequent hurricanes, coastal erosion, desertification in some areas and so on. The whole question is the equity that is to take place when funding is to be made available. And those who are the real people causing the problem, well then, polluters should pay, and not just pay to adapt themselves to a new paradigm, but to pay other people who have been damaged. But if we're not careful, you know how these things go. They would make rules and apply it across the board. And invariably, these rules could have the effect of causing people like us to have to comply with situations that are not entirely in our interest. So we had to be very involved and very engaged, and we are very involved and very engaged in these matters. And so this is going to go on for a while. But I want the population of Trinidad and Tobago to understand that it is not something that is to come. It is something that is here already. As a matter of fact, in making the point at COP in Glasgow, the British government assigned only electric vehicles to be used in and around the conference. So all the vehicles that have been using there, being picked up and taken around, they were demonstrating that the internal combustion engine is feasibly to be phased out. You would have heard major manufacturers of internal combustion engine indicating time frames in the very near future where they will stop making engines that use gas and diesel. So while there will still be a demand for energy worldwide, because the world's business has to be fueled by some kind of energy, and that there will still be the use for some significant volumes of products from the hydrocarbon source because of the logistics of using that as against others. There will be, and there is being, significant changes to a situation where products that we are deeply involved in will not be in a market as the same market that we were in 5 years ago or even today. The market 5 years from today, 10 years from today, 15 years from today will be quite different. And therefore, we have to prepare ourselves, one, in the short term, to defend our argument that gas is the clean fuel, among the fuels available to humankind at this time, and that it will take a little while for us to get to a net zero position. But even in a net zero position where you are having a reduction in the use of hydrocarbons and an increase in the use of renewables, in that market, the question is who is going to produce, what is going to be worth, and what penalties are likely to come to those who don't comply. Because the next thing that you're going to hear is that even though people are required to use these products that we may still be providing to the international market, it is almost certain that as we go further down the road, that there will be some kind of arrangement being put in place, hopefully with our involvement and agreement, and not just being imposed upon us, that there are penalties on your products going into certain markets if the products are not green as they describe them, coming from a source that is renewable. So these are the kinds of conversations that have far, far-reaching consequences, and there are consequences for the social side of society, for the financial side, for the geographical side, for the demographic side. There are all kinds of complications. And I think the ball has just begun to roll on a slope that could see it rolling continuously going forward. And we, Trinidad and Tobago, our economy is deeply involved in this transitional period that the world is being asked to go through, and that the world is going through at this time as a supplier from an economy that is heavily dependent on hydrocarbons. We have a lot of interest in this matter, and that is why we have paid such attention to it. You would have seen us reporting what we have done to date in preparation, because frankly, we are not out front waving a flag and demanding that the world turn upside down here. We have to be very cautious and accepting that there is a climate change problem, accepting that it's driven in large part by the use of hydrocarbons that are released into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide in particular. And of course, that change will come. But our presentation to this conference, to the world, was that we expect that the change will come to people like us in a reasonable and manageable way. So we've put that on record, and the conversations we've had with a number of people around the world, it was a tremendous conference. I mean, during this period, you're able to talk to a lot of people who have similar problems. And with the conversations, when the decision-making is to be crystallized, we all know where different people are. There was one particular country that reported that they jumped ahead and went 100% on renewables. And the climate change that is taking place saw them suffering drought, so the hydropower was drying up, saw them now having to go to the same hydrocarbon market to buy, where they don't have long-term contracts, and therefore have to pay through their nose on the spot market for hydrocarbon products, because the renewables have not been delivering on the scale that they should have because of a negative response to changes in the climate where they are. So it's not a simple matter, but it's a matter that we have to make decisions on. And we've made some of those decisions. Very soon, as a matter of fact, just about the time when we had to respond to COVID by closing the border, we had a meeting in London with BP, and you would have known through the communication that we would have put out, we did invite proposals in our country for the production as part of our climate change response, and requiring to have a portion of our energy coming from renewable sources. We did invite proposals, open proposals, for persons who would want to invest in producing power in this country from sources other than oil and gas. And that process went. We did get pretty good responses, and in the end, the evaluation team chose a company that has as its principals, fortunately, two of the main hydrocarbon producers in our country, Shell and BP. And we had set about, and there's a company called Light Source. So we are on track to produce 112 megawatts of power, which is 10% of our needs. And that is to start very soon. We should have kicked that off here last year, March, and the head of renewables at BP was supposed to be coming to Trinidad and Tobago, but as fate would have it, we had to close the border, and for the last 18 months we have been tied up with COVID. But we are back on track with that, and very soon that will be underway. But our commitment to the international community is to get to 30% by sometime in the not too distant future, maybe by 2030. So if we can get 30% of our power from renewables, meaning solar power and possibly some wind power and whatever else we can do, that would be our contribution. It would be large for us, but if you look at the world map, you will see Trinidad and Tobago as just a dot on the map. We can't change the world's climate, but we can contribute to the problem. And because we are involved in this international business of selling hydrocarbon products, we're not going to be given a pass to continue doing what we are doing, especially given the emotive response of the world that humankind is required to do differently for the survival of the human race, and that is don't choose extinction by the way we have been conducting our business. We have a lot of interesting things to do here in Trinidad and Tobago on the positive side. And interestingly enough, following this meeting at COP, we combined our visit abroad to have it, to meeting with BP and Shell at the decision-making level. As I've said all along, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, on matters of this nature, the business of BP and Shell and BHP and others, now more than ever, it is important for us as a country to be in sync with, in phase with those companies that are operating in our country in this sector, because we don't want them making decisions on their own about our future and about our resources, especially now that decisions have to be made. And some of the decisions could see and are seeing companies withdrawing from certain kinds of activities. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we are still exploring for gas and oil. But the argument in response to climate change, and you would have seen it strongly being presented from some loud quarters in Glasgow, is that banks should now be made to make a contribution to this problem of climate deterioration caused by hydrocarbon usage. And what banks are required to do, coming from some quarters, is to stop funding companies that are engaged in oil and gas discovery, exploration, and those using it. Now, for Trinidad and Tobago, that is a dagger aimed at our heart, because if banks listen to any of that, as some banks are listening, and are responding in that way by reducing their funding for these kind of businesses, then it means that there's less money available to these companies to do exploration. And the question would be, where do they explore? Whatever money they have for exploration, where do they spend it? So we in Trinidad and Tobago, we have to be in the room making our country still, notwithstanding what is being said about climate change, notwithstanding what is being said about the need to act immediately of never touching coal and oil and gas again, we have to make sure that in the period where these products are still to be used, that our business attracts the funding that we require. So we will still be going out in the next few weeks with our bid round. Minister Young is going to a meeting in Houston very soon, and our technical team from the Ministry of Energy, we will go and present our acreage as we have been preparing to do, and we are anticipating that interested companies, maybe not worldwide, but those who are involved in Trinidad and Tobago, I think we have sufficiently convinced them that Trinidad and Tobago is still their best option to continue to extract these products, even though the market is asking for changes. Those changes are not going to come overnight in the way that some people are asking, but changes are coming. We have to continue to sell as much as we can because that's what we live on, but we have to also do what is possible. For example, another aspect of the climate change demand that's being made is for methane to be extracted from the product that we're selling. And so that is a bit of high-level chemistry that has to go on, chemical engineering in the production of certain products, so that when they go out in the international market, they can be seen to have had the effort of reducing the pollutants that are now causing the problem. So we have to do certain things differently. And all of these things have costs and consequences. And that's where we are at the moment. But we've had very good meetings with BP and Shell, and we did discuss other matters, for example, the sanctioning of certain products, certain projects, which we need to be sanctioned to be carried on as economic activity in our country, because without those activities, we would really be in big trouble. And the acceleration of the changes that some people are anticipating, if those changes happen as fast as they are required to be made, or as some people are demanding that they made, we will have to adjust faster than we are, in fact, adjusting. And we cannot accept that it's business as usual. We have to accept that we are in a period and in a space where there is tremendous change to come. Some of it is change for the better. Some of it is change that have cost and maybe pain, but certainly we want to ensure that the resources that we have are not excluded from the world market once the world market is using it. So we have a number of individual projects. You would have heard us talk about the Manatee gas reservoir, which Trinidad and Tobago shares ownership with Venezuela. Shell has confirmed that they will make the investment in Manatee to ensure that we get that portion of gas that belongs to us. That is underway. And interestingly enough, both Shell and BP have had significant changes in leadership in recent times. And we've had to make sure that the new leaders know of Trinidad and Tobago, know of our appreciation of our province, know of the government's interest in ensuring that the investment takes place in our country. And I think we've done that on this round. We've had very good responses from Shell and BP, and significant investments are committed to keeping Trinidad and Tobago in the production side of things. So while we are on the, yes, we have to do something, a lot of things, to not pollute the atmosphere and not bring about the climate change that is detrimental to human race, we also have to be realistic and understand that we are in the business of hydrocarbons and we will remain there for as long as there's a market in the world. We're not alone in taking this position, because I paid careful attention to the United States and Australia and China at this meeting. These are countries that are far better off than we are in making the changes that are required. But because of the importance of their hydrocarbon sector, especially coal, those three countries, and I may add India to that too, but India spoke out, but those countries have not yet taken a position that we will get out of this as you are saying that we should. It's a negotiated position to come, and we are awaiting the negotiations to see what will be required of us as a participant as against what is being required of them as major contributors, and most importantly, how the funding that is earmarked for change will be distributed, and whether in fact we will be beneficiary of that adaptation funding that we are talking about as part of the whole international response. So these are the complications of the conference that continues. Our team is there, and we wouldn't know the outcome until after the 12th. And we are hoping some movement has been had. I think there's been pretty clear agreement on what probably was the easiest aspect of it, which is how you treat with forests. But interestingly enough, Trinidad and Tobago is one of the few countries in the world that has in its economy renewables in forests and materials, and I'm talking here about our teak fields. We have had teak planted in this country since 1946, and we have been harvesting teak. And interestingly enough, teak is a product where when you cut the tree down, it automatically regenerates itself through shoots. Many of our colleagues who were surprised to hear that. And we said, well, we are already in that, and we can do more in Trinidad and Tobago in literally increasing the number of trees in Trinidad and Tobago and continue to sell teak as a cultivated product. Because most of the high-end furniture in the world now will not buy teak from wild forests. But if you have cultivated forests, then you have a market. So that's something that we talked about. As a matter of fact, I remember speaking about this at length in the 2013 local government election, saying that local government bodies should set about, as part of the development program in their areas and these make work programs that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago, we could use some of that, create employment to plant new cultivated trees. And now we're being told that is a fantastic thing to do as our response, part of our response in regreening the world. So you'll see some more of that being done. The most important thing, which we've started already, is to establish the nurseries, to have the planting material available, dramatically increase the amount, because if you don't have planting material, you can't talk about planting acres of teak or acres of anything. So you will see us doing that, and we will restore some of our watersheds which have been damaged. We can, when Caroni went out of sugar, there was some acreage in Caroni that was identified as not being useful for agriculture, but for agroforestry. So we can get there, and if we get funding from the Green Fund, the Green Climate Fund, that is one of the kinds of areas that funding could be spent on. And of course, coastal protection to ameliorate or eliminate coastal erosion, which is very aggressive on Trinidad's east coast, Tobago's east coast. We're having significant erosion. The Minister of Finance will tell you we've just budgeted to spend significant monies in Tobago to protect the Magdalena Hotel, which is quite an asset that we have there. But if we don't protect the coastline outside the hotel, we can lose that investment. But by the same token, if we spend money in coastal protection from the Lambo down to Milford area, we will be protecting ourselves from very aggressive road loss and possible damage to the hotel. So we are seeing that here. I mean, the countries reporting, the Maldives are reporting that they've lost islands already. Some of their lower islands have already gone underwater. So it's not something that is to come. It's a period, as if COVID wasn't enough to deal with for 2 years running. We are now have to add to it a requirement to move faster and more significantly in responding to climate change issues. And because we are a hydrocarbon producer, petrochemical producer, and oil producer in the international market, the spotlight will be on us. It is on us. As a matter of fact, the data shows that on a per capita basis, meaning if you divide the number of people by the number of volumes of tons of these things that we are handling, that Trinidad and Tobago is deemed to be, on a per capita basis, the largest polluter, simply because we produce so much of it from a small population of 1.4 million people. So we have a work cut out for us, and we are engaged. And the division in the Ministry of Planning and Development is very engaged, and the country is engaged, and our partners in the hydrocarbon sector, they too are engaged. And in the coming weeks, between now and the early part of the first quarter of next year, you will see a lot of decisions where the government is encouraging and partnering with the major hydrocarbon producers in Trinidad and Tobago in responding to this. And of course, we're saying that it's in our interest to carry the conversation that given all the fuels that are available outside the renewables, that gas is in fact the clean energy at this time. So we're not joining the conversation that gas should be lumped with oil and coal. That is not in our interest to carry that conversation. We are also at this time evaluating the possibilities we have before us at the level of the cabinet and other aspects of government, the use of what is called green or blue hydrogen. Hydrogen is a byproduct of some of the activity we have at Point Lisas, and we can also we have surplus power in the country because we never concluded the aluminum smelter. We built significant capacity there, and we are negotiating now and evaluating whether it is possible to make our contribution and clear our way to the marketplace by coming to an agreement with prospective investors to use power generated from the existing facility and power from the green source that will come, starting with the 112 megawatts that we're talking about. Once we can get an agreement on the pricing arrangement where it doesn't involve too much of a subsidy, that we can generate hydrogen and use that hydrogen to clean up and green up our Point Lisas products so that they can, one, enter the market safely, and two, command a better price, being products that are using hydrogen from sustainable sources. So these are the complexities and the complications that are forming significant parts of the conversation. The Ministry of Energy is involved in a big way, the Ministry of Planning and Development, and of course the future of the country is at stake here. I am quite anxious to see what kinds of rules will come out of these huge international efforts, because history has shown that when the rules do come, it usually tends to want to place more of a burden on those with the smaller shoulders. So this is no different, and that is why we have to have our voices heard. That is why we have to have partnerships, we have to have friends. We are very, very closely associated with the African countries that are also in a similar situation that we are in, many of them coming later on. I was talking to the president of Madagascar, who only recently, they have made significant finds in gas, and who have reached out to Trinidad and Tobago for technical assistance to help them get this gas to market, because they want to get their gas to market. And the Ministry of Energy and Foreign Affairs are conducted and will continue these conversations through our technical people at LNG, NGC and so on. And we continued our successful approaches to the governments of Ghana and Kenya, and where we are building up a very strong Caribbean-African relationship, because these international decisions require that you have the support of influential nations. We can't go and stand on a platform and expect that our voice will carry over the strong wind that is blowing from other quarters. But we are much better off connected to those who are supporting our perspectives and our future. And CARICOM is working assiduously towards establishing stronger diplomatic arrangements with African countries, countries like South Africa, Kenya, Mozambique, and Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and so on. So if you see us making those contacts, as a matter of fact, initially I was due to go to a meeting that was called by the Emir of Qatar to deal with just this problem, because he has called a meeting of all the gas-producing countries in our attempt to fend off the demonization of gas in this whole question of the hydrocarbon rollback. That meeting was supposed to have taken place at the end of this month, and I was committed to taking part in that meeting, but because of COVID problems that we all are having, that meeting has been postponed to sometime in February or March. We await the new dates, but Trinidad and Tobago will be participating in that. And there are other meetings that will follow, this meeting in Glasgow was so seminal that it will spawn a series of other meetings of people responding to the consequences of this Glasgow meeting. So that's what it is, and that's where we're at, and it's been quite a hectic and productive period, and I'm pleased that you were able to take part, and I can report that the meeting was very well organized, surprisingly so, given the scale of the meeting, but it was very well organized, and we anticipate that we'll get some orderly outcome. So if you have any questions, I can try and answer you now if I am able to.
Darren Baho from the Newsday.
What's the name?
Darren Baho from the Newsday. On a domestic level, in terms of...
Well, let's not get on the domestic level yet, because I know you're going to go there. If there are questions based on what I've said in response to the COP26, in response to our meetings with the energy companies, if you have any questions on that, let's deal with that first, and then we'll go to the local issues, which I'm sure may not be of that nature.
In terms of planning ahead for the diversification of the economy, some of the issues you would have raised in the past would have been tourism and so forth. What percentage of our GDP or drive would you now push to ensure that we have sustainable jobs when these sectors in the hydrocarbon industry dry up, for want of a better word?
Well, everything that has to be done would create opportunities for the people who have to do it. So whatever we do in the tourism sector and whatever we do to make changes, especially if the changes are additions to what we're doing now, it will create opportunities, and that's where you get jobs. But by the same token, you have to bear in mind that some things are no longer going to require people doing them. For example, if you are dealing with motor car cooling systems and like a radiator and a transmission and so on, when we move from internal combustion to just an electric motor driving a car, you can see that people are going to have to do different things. And of course, the reskilling and the retooling of the country will have to start, because when motor vehicles are now only operated by electric motors and electronic systems, to operate and to maintain those vehicles, you will have to reskill and retool the population. And if you listen to what I said on Tuesday, speaking for Trinidad and Tobago, we said that we are already looking at that as an activity that the country has to focus on, retooling and reskilling. Because the man who could fix a diesel engine now in a car may not have a car to fix 5 or 10 years from today with a diesel engine, because most motor vehicles, especially passenger vehicles, very quickly are going to go to electric. The heavier vehicles may still remain, but that is no guarantee, because we already have electric buses, we had in use electric trucks, and of course, very soon we will experience what people experience in the horse and buggy replacement age. There was a time when everybody felt that the only transport you could have had is a horse pulling a carriage. And in fact, some people did object to the internal combustion engine. And very soon, horse and buggy were phased out. We are there at this point in time.
Just from a policy perspective, in terms of direction from the government, in terms of using electric vehicles and reducing the carbon footprint, in terms of people buying vehicles, what would you suggest to your cabinet members and those in authority?
Well, you would have heard the Minister of Finance in the last budget opening the gambit by indicating tax relief on electric vehicles. And that is where you start. You encourage people to go in the direction of where the supply is going. Fortunately, I should say fortunately, yes, electric vehicles are not as easily available. And I think that is largely because of the COVID, because the rush to make electric vehicles would have been far greater had the COVID not interfered with the supply situation in the last 18 months. But as soon as things settle down, we anticipate that there'll be a whole lot more electric vehicles available to the normal users of, especially the smaller vehicles. And we are already on board with that in opening the door for the encouragement of electric vehicles for all the good reasons that will demonstrate. So we don't expect that to be just fashionable and seasonal. We are seeing this as a fundamental pathway that we are on, and we are managing it while still taking part in the gasoline diesel business, because you still have vehicles coming in that way, but it is the days are numbered. Not too long ago, you had General Motors saying that they will make their last diesel internal combustion engine in 15 years. 15 years is not a long time, and long before you get to the 15th year, the market will be awash with electric vehicles.
Mr. Prime Minister, good evening. Welcome home.
Yes.
Urvashi from
Thank you very
TV6. Would you be able to say whether there were discussions with BP and Shell with respect to restarting Train 1 of Atlantic LNG?
That was one of the major discussions that we had. We are restructuring the LNG infrastructure. You know, we have 4 trains there, right? Train 1 being if one says the initial flagship, which the government owns 10%. Government also owns 11% of Train 4, and we have no ownership in Trains 2 and 3. And you would have heard us say over and over from the very beginning that we have to revisit, and we have had long discussions, not concluded yet, but very far advanced with respect to the restructuring of the LNG infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago, because it is not for the government to just walk out of a situation on Train 1. Train 1 is integrally connected to Trains 2, 3, and 4. And it's not that we own the business. We are only a 10% owner. But as a country, we have a much larger interest than 10%. So we would be the last person to walk away from the table on Train 1. But in the discussions that we have been having, we as a government would have done, and we continued to give hope for the breathing of life into Train 1 until the doctor said it's dead. I think the doctor is putting on his coat right now. And we had the kind of discussions where with BP and Shell, particularly BP, the largest gas producer, where it is initially government relied, when we extended the life of Train 1 for 5 years, and BP was engaged in an infill drilling program, we anticipated a positive outturn. As fate would have it, BP drilled a number of dry holes and had to, in the end, confirm that we don't have the gas for Train 1. But we are a 10% shareholder. We spent some money to keep that option open. I heard my colleagues, the national misrepresenters, entertaining themselves that we spent $400 million on Train 1, and it happens so easily and it's swallowed so easily. We spent, I think it's about 33 million US dollars to keep the Train 1 option open, not only for negotiating purposes, but also for the possibility that if gas was available, that we will continue. I think we can now conclude that the gas is not there because BP has not been successful. What we discussed is what BP is going to do going forward in terms of investing, and again, keep continuing to try to find more gas in the Columbus Basin and elsewhere. We do have gas offshore, which has been found, but offshore deep water gas is not the same as shallow water gas. It's not the same as proven gas in Manatee, which Shell is doing. So that being so, the shareholders of Train 1 now have, and we've agreed that by the end of the first quarter of 2022, we will take a definitive decision on how we together do what has to be done about Train 1 and attempt to conclude the restructuring of Trains 2, 3, and 4, where all the shareholders will have their interests well served in a restructured arrangement of the 2, 3, and 4 trains. So that is well underway, and that was part of our discussion there.
Minister, as it relates to Manatee, now you did say shall confirm that it will make an investment in Manatee. You didn't mention it, but was a contract signed, or where are we in terms of that?
We have concluded the production sharing contract. It will be a production sharing contract, and that will be signed in Trinidad on the 17th of this month.
Yeah.
Right? So we're having that signing. The senior people from Shell are coming here to sign that, and that would be a significant change for more reasons than one. The most important being we did manage to move away from a joint arrangement with Venezuela, which was never going to come in the current time frame. And we got the agreement to extract our 27% from that reservoir. And of course, once the infrastructure is in place on the border for that, it has all kinds of possibilities for encouraging further activity on the border in that area. So I think it's the first time that the Venezuelan gas would have been put in that way. You remember, we did have, before the Manatee Agreement, we did have a lot of effort to unitize and produce together with Venezuela. 15 years, 17 years, that didn't happen. So we decided to make efforts to get our gas out of it, and we've done that. So when we sign on the 17th, that's what that's going to be. We're going to get first draw on the reservoir. We have a term sheet in hand on Jargon, which is Venezuelan gas, but American sanctions prevented us from accessing that gas through our Hibiscus platform, which Shell and Trinidad and Tobago own. But we're keeping our fingers crossed that the world could change, and that could change, and that term sheet would not be torn up. So we have some positives there, and that 27% of proven gas from Manatee is very significant, coming at a time when overall our gas consumption in the country is requiring greater replacement and finding of new gas.
Prime Minister, we try to sign off on these carbon-intensive projects and programs. We get the impression that there's some sort of expediency. I'm wondering, how much do you think the urgings of government will matter when internationally, as you did mention, energy companies stand to be sanctioned, they stand to be penalized and demonized, as you said, for doing business, with us?
I don't want it to sound as though the door is closed. If you look at the requirement, the world's requirement for energy remains. You can't just flick a switch and say we turn it off and we stop doing that. What we're asking for is replacement of the hydrocarbon products by sustainable inputs coming from natural sources like the water, hydropower, or sun or wind. It will take quite some time for a significant portion of the world's energy demand to come from those sources. The millions of megawatts that are required now, only 6% is currently coming from those sources. By the time you get to 10 or 20 or 30%, it will take some time. What we're talking about here on the production side in Trinidad and Tobago is today's requirement to keep our plants going, and the market is still there. And let's put it this way, we are not a pariah. As long as there are other people selling coal, as long as there are other people using hydrocarbons, we too will be extracting our hydrocarbon and selling in that market. But we will be influenced and guided by, and of course, having to make the changes that are required once there are international agreements to which we are party.
Hi, good night, Prime Minister. Renuka Singh from Trinidad Guardian. Considering the sentiment and the mindset that you left in Glasgow, do you foresee an uphill battle in now trying to convince the international buyers that gas is cleaner than traditional fossil fuels?
I don't have to do that. I mean, it's a fact that gas is cleaner than coal and oil. The trouble is that if you take the position that all hydrocarbons should get out of the market because they are damaging the atmosphere, then we'll say, well, that's not feasible. If you're going to stop using coal, then you're going to use more gas. And if you're going to stop using bunker fuel and oil, then you have to use more gas. So right now, in dealing with the coal problem, the market for gas is a better option. So fortunately for us, we are on the gas side of the supply. And we've got confirmations from BP and Shell that they have no intention of withdrawing from Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, they have every intention of continuing to invest in Trinidad and Tobago in the search for and the production of gas, because the world market will still need gas. And as long as that is so, what we can supply, we'll supply.
I just want to go back, if you may permit me to, on the domestic issue. In relation to the national psyche of people's attitude towards the environment, the issue of illegal quarrying, the issue of recycling, the issue of illegal dumps, and the dumps that we currently have that is leaking bad minerals into our aquifers. What do you have to say to people to help preserve the environment on their personal level?
Well, we can take that all the way down to, to Charlie and littering. But you did mention a very important aspect there, and that is not just illegal quarrying in general, especially in Trinidad, where significant acreage of our eastern lands have been torn up to extract sand and gravel, and there has been virtually no reinstatement of those lands. And one of the things that we could do, providing we get the appropriate funding, is to get some serious reinstatement done on those lands and then use those areas for the location of possible solar panel business, which will generate the kind of power we're talking about. Because those lands cannot be used for agriculture or anything, but they certainly require to be reinstated. And while we're doing that, we need to, and you would have seen recent police action against illegal quarrying, we need to enforce the law to protect the environment from illegal activity, quarrying being one of those. So we need to focus on an objective of reinstating those lands. Some of them could be, some afforestation could take place in some of it, but we really do need land space. Because when you put out these solar panels, you're covering significant spaces. And that is one of the areas that we could use for that, providing we reinstate them and have them ready for that kind of use. It all depends on whether we are going to be able to access the climate fund. And that's one of the things we raised in our presentation to the global community, that we really should have access to the Green Climate Fund to do things like that. So if that comes out of the COP26, that countries like us, you would have heard Barbados speaking for the small island developing countries, speak very forcefully about our need to access. We didn't point fingers at anybody, but from the Paris meeting, $80 billion had been allocated. Much of it has been spent, but we were pretty much left out. It was not coming our way. So we're talking about making changes in COP26 to ensure that when the new allocations are settled, that there's an understanding that countries like us can benefit from significant pathways that need to be put in. We need to have pathways where countries like ours can access the Green Climate Fund to do the kind of things that I just mentioned.
Prime Minister, I know that one of the things that you have scheduled for this week is the debate on the nominees for the Police Service Commission. There was some comments from the opposition about the speedy debate of that, whether it should have been done before you have left to go to Scotland. Can you comment on that?
The opposition needs to decide which side of the mouth they're talking from. You cannot be talking from both sides of your neck. If you, on one breath, saying that the president must not move expeditiously to find people who will, quality people, who will agree to serve on the commission. I distinctly recall hearing the opposition leader taking issue with the president, who she seems to think is a footballer, to kick around by her, that the president should not move with haste to find people. The government did say that we will move with dispatch. As soon as the president informed the parliament, the government will move with dispatch, and we will do that. And you can't be saying that the president should not move to find people, and then 1 week later, in your idleness, saying that the government shouldn't go to an international conference like this and not stay home and go to parliament to do the very same thing that you said the president is doing too fast. So that is just conversation for people that have nothing to do.
Prime Minister, as it relates to the very debate, are you able to say if the 5 names will be debated at once, or if it goes...
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
As it relates to the very same debate on Wednesday, is it that the 5 names will be debated at once, or will they be considered...
That is a matter for the leader of government business and the leader of the opposition. The president has found and has got... The president is satisfied that she's found 5 citizens who she could advance to the parliament. Those names are in the parliament. As soon as the names got there, the 5 names, the leader of government business asked that it be put on the order paper. It's on the order paper. A sitting of parliament has been set for Wednesday. We will go to parliament and we will treat with it. There's absolutely nothing to lose any sleep over or to be upset about, unless, of course, you belong to that group that thinks that nothing should go right.
Mr. Prime Minister, on another matter, do you have any perspective or any consideration on the state of emergency and if and how it can remain in place, and also the curfew?
The state of emergency is coming to an end at the end of this month, and as of now, I don't have any intention of asking the Parliament to extend it.
So that, just so that I understand correctly, so that would also imply that the curfew will also...
Well, the curfew comes out of the emergency. You can't have the curfew if the emergency has ended. But I think by now we would have gone into a routine, and I think by now the population should be able to cope and to do what needs to be done, so because this is no longer a short-term situation. This situation that we're in it for the long haul.
And finally, from your travels, Prime Minister, you did travel during the pandemic. From your observations, were you able to discern, how the rest of the world is carrying on and managing COVID, and has that lent, or how has it lent to your current perspective and position?
Well, I've only been to the UK, and today we passed through Holland. And one of the things I observed in the UK is that people, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the UK government has, as a matter of policy, determined that COVID is endemic. And therefore, the population is being asked to accept that it's going to be with us. But the UK is very heavily vaccinated. And they had suffered some very significant population loss and very serious spikes at an earlier time during the pandemic. And they also had control of the vaccine supply situation. And in the UK, you don't see very many people outside wearing masks. We wore our masks throughout, or except for certain very special situations. But people are largely without masks. But on public transport and in planes and indoors, it's recommended that you wear a mask. So there's a recommendation, and outside is pretty much wide open. And they're doing that in a highly vaccinated population, and where there's virtually vaccine hesitancy is very, very low. And they're having the same experience we're having here, where it is the unvaccinated people who are challenging the hospital system. And if you do have a low hesitancy, and that is the outcome, that the vaccinated people, even though they are getting infected, are not in fact requiring much healthcare at the hospitals, then you can go on for a long time. If you don't have a high level of vaccination and you have large numbers of people who are requiring hospital care, then the problem now is not simply persons getting infected with COVID, but the persons who require hospital care. And the doctors are telling us that even the ones who require hospital care now are requiring a longer session of care. So we have that problem, which they don't seem to have.
My colleagues in Tobago are very interested to know if you're going across to Tobago for the campaign launch on Sunday.
Well, I haven't made that decision just yet, but I might. I have been traveling for the last. I'm thinking of trying to get there, so I may get there, but I.
Finally, Mr. Prime Minister, as you know, you speak to the curfew, the SOE will no longer be in place. What about sports and other activities?
Well, the curfew is in place, so please don't. I said when it comes to an end, I don't intend at this time to ask for an extension, so that the end is going to be at the end of the month. So between now and then, it's in place, so nothing has changed on that. Right? So after that, we get back to some semblance of normalcy. Okay. Thank you all very much. Thank you for coming out, and thank you for taking the information to the public. Thank you.